Good afternoon, everyone. How are we all? When I was invited along, I thought, I can come along and speak and hear about fantastic topics around innovation, or I can sit in front of the TV and listen to a damn squib of a budget. And I chose this, and I think we all made the correct decision based on what's come before us. So I am Brian Marrinan. I'm the managing partner of Journey Partners, and we are an organization that focuses on innovation through people. So I'm here to tell you a couple of stories about open innovation and how that's creating an impact in the world of innovation today. I started off my career in this beautiful city of Boston. I was actually on that floor there looking out that window and had a magnificent time in this beautiful old traditional investment bank. And it was so old, kind of New England money, that their clients were literally dying off. And they realized we can't get their kids to stay with us because we're that old school. We're not being innovative around what we're presenting. So we set up what we now know, or now think, was the first fintech innovation lab. Back then, when you said fintech, you probably thought of something like this. And we didn't actually call it fintech at the time. We didn't know that it was an incubator at the time. That meant eggs. And we had a fantastic time working with a variety of different stakeholders who were in this burgeoning Boston startup scene, trying to get new perspectives on how the digital landscape was changing so rapidly in the 1990s. So I had a magnificent time over there. I came back and I went via London to Dublin, set up a company in Dublin with my brother, family business, always slightly dodgy. But had a magnificent time. One of the great projects that we were able to work on, which kind of linked back to my Boston days, was we worked on the first startup accelerator in Ireland. So we built the idea for it, engaged universities like DCU, UCD, Trinity, and went to the government and raised 25 million for the first accelerator. Again, at a time when you said accelerator, everyone thought of this rather than startups. So it was a good opportunity to be at the forefront of something quite different then. That was the same summer, to put it in perspective, that Y Combinator, the most famous accelerator in the world, was created over in Silicon Valley. So we often think that we're behind the times when it comes to some of these things. In fact, we're right there with some of the best in the world in terms of innovation. So I loved that. And I have since gone down much more people route, because one of the things that I found fascinating was that we found certain people better able to handle the creative and innovation process. We found other people who were quite restrictive around change within organizations. So I went down a people route and started to understand a little bit more about what motivates people in different directions. And then 3 years ago, set up Journey Partners, and our focus as an organization is working on innovation within traditional and highly regulated sectors. So we have worked with governments around the world, both state and semi-state bodies, to help them develop out their innovation structures. We work with financial services organizations. We set up a fintech lab for one of the larger global financial services players. Healthcare, we acted as the innovation leads for eHealth Ireland for a while, eHealth Ireland being the technological arm of the HSE. And then our probably major focus has been one of these really traditional areas of aviation and travel technology. Very little has changed around the aviation and travel space for a long time. The pace of innovation there is incredibly slow. What you experience on a trip, apart from maybe being able to book it online rather than going through a tour agent, is very similar to what you would have experienced 30 years ago. maybe a little bit less comfort when you're flying with a Ryanair or an EasyJet or someone like that. But that really drew us to that industry in terms of what we could do that was slightly different and actually brought a different perspective to things there. So we've been spending a lot of time on that and developed a thesis around innovation and how open innovation works in particular, which focuses on this internal versus external innovation work. So we have worked and helped to build labs that are very focused internally around culture change and developing new processes. And then we have worked on others that are very focused on the external environment and where potentially disruptive innovation will come from in an industry. If you think of an industry like aviation leasing, which makes a crazy amount of money every year, really almost like insurance. It is one of those industries that is just ripe for disruption. I mean, the people who are in that space are getting paid an awful lot of money. The companies are making an awful lot of profit. And really all they're doing is buying airplanes and then renting them out. It's, Avis and those kind of companies on acid. So they're quite conscious that disruption could very well come true. The landscape, because not as many people know about the details of aviation leasing, it's had a smaller workforce compared to, say, fintech, for example, which have had quite large workforces who are all thinking about how to disrupt their own businesses. I think that's why the pace of change has been a little bit lower. But it's ripe for that. And they're very conscious of that. So we've worked with one of the larger innovation leasing companies to look at how they build more of an internal versus external focus. They have been quite concentrated internally. And if you look at the biggest examples of disruptive innovation around the world, it very rarely comes from within an industry. It typically comes from outside the industry. And the challenge with that is if you start to disrupt your own industry, then you could be leaving an awful lot of cash on the table. Like in a pure commercial perspective, how do you know when is the right time to launch that new product that will disrupt the rest of your product portfolio? You could be losing hundreds of millions, billions in the case of that industry on the table without actually understanding that you should have gone 3 years later with this new product. And then the other danger is if you go first, you're making all the other mistakes that everyone else is learning from. So there's a strong argument if you're in an industry like that you don't go first, but you invest in those that do. So you bring forward the startups and the opportunities that are looking at disrupting your industry. You take an equity position in them and you allow them to start disrupting rather than doing it yourself. And on the back of that thesis, we have worked with a few different people to really look at the commercial success of innovation. We hate what is known as innovation theater. The amount of companies whose innovation departments lie within marketing is ridiculous. And we tend to avoid those like the plague. These are our key things. Unless something increases revenue, cut costs, or enhances the customer experience, we're not interested in. And this is one of the things that led us to Propeller Shannon. So Propeller came out of the back of Ireland with this enormous history in aviation and travel. Shannon in particular was where duty-free was invented, 1949. It's hard to imagine an airport anywhere in the world without duty-free now. The first commercially successful aviation leasing firm, founded by Tony Ryan of Ryanair, was set up in Shannon. And now 50% of the world's aircraft are leased, and 50% of those are leased out of Ireland. And we have Europe's largest airline in Ryanair, Aer Lingus, with an incredible heritage. We have Irish people at the head of IAG, Qantas, Embraer, the Brazilian aircraft manufacturer. So real incredible heritage. And then on travel technology side, we have CarTrawler, Datalex, OpenJaw, BoxEver, Hostelworld, the biggest seller of hostel beds in the world. All these people who are leaders in their niche. And we had never really recognized that Ireland was one of the leading global ecosystems around this space. So we decided to raise money from a variety of different partners: Boeing, Datalex, Irish Aviation Authority, the first regulator in the world to invest in an accelerator like this, and partnered with the Shannon Group, DC Iran Academy, and ourselves to create Propeller. We invested in 19 different companies over the past 2 years. And the interesting thing about this is all those companies who've invested get an equity position in these companies. This is a non-traditional fund. It's not just, we wait for a return and then we send the money back to the investors. They actually get a percentage share in each of these companies. So they are driven to help them succeed. And if their industries are disrupted by these companies coming through, then they actually get to share in that upside. So that was a core component of this. And it's right across the aviation and travel space that we have been looking at in terms of companies. The other interesting thing is, because of the story we were able to tell about Ireland, half of our companies came from other countries, not just Ireland. We have people coming from Los Angeles right through to Dubai. And that's where Ireland can play a different kind of game in this space. One other example that I'd like to tell you about is Vive Air Labs. So in association with an airline in Colombia, we co-founded Vive Air Labs, the first aviation innovation lab in Latin America. It's been a fascinating cycle where we had to concentrate a little bit more on 3 key things. First is democratizing payments. Second, building open data airlines. And the third is building an innovation ecosystem. And I'll talk about these in a little bit more detail. 70% of Latin Americans don't have bank accounts. A third of our passengers were trying to pay with cash. Nightmare for an airline. Real nightmare. And yet, if we looked at payments, 80% of people used WhatsApp to communicate with businesses. So not just with each other, that was well over 90%, very close to 100%, but regularly used it to contact businesses. That's slightly different to here. So we set up a payment system through WhatsApp, and it's been so successful. I can't give you the exact figures because it's slightly sensitive. If I just pull something out. But we're expecting a return 7 figures within the first year, and probably multiples of those 7 figures. So we will be in the millions in terms of the return from that WhatsApp payments alone. So that's one of the areas we've had to look at. Second is around open data. And open data has become fascinating to us because governments have been releasing data sets for quite a while. And interesting explorations have come out of it, to the point where the EU has now realized that we're, as a people who have been paying for the government to gather data, and therefore we should have open access to that. So the EU is putting in regulations around actually releasing data from government departments. We're finding NGOs are rapidly following in that direction as well. Lots of the kind of World Bank, UNDP, all those kind of organizations are focused in this kind of space. And we think the private sector is very rapidly going to follow, because the opportunity there for people to play with your data and not have to pay for even bigger teams of extraordinary data scientists is quite opportunistic. So we want to become the first open data airline in the world. And it's a big challenge. Just even going through that data and seeing what you can anonymize is quite interesting. But it's a big one for us. And then the last piece was partnerships. So we've actively built an ecosystem in Latin America where we can, with a variety of different people. So we're trying to engage the airports in terms of them releasing their data so that it can be integrated into ours. We're trying to release the municipalities' data so that they engage. And we're looking at solutions now where if you can integrate, say, the traffic systems with the public transport systems, with the airports and the flight detail systems, you'll be able to get a notification that you should be leaving the house 15 minutes early because there's a traffic jam. Or actually, you can leave 20 minutes later because your flight's delayed. And it all becomes much more real time. It would be smarter for you to get this bus than to get an Uber because the bus lanes are slightly lower today. Those kind of things are going to be really interesting to us. The other thing is universities are loving this. DCU should be on that as well because they're actively engaged in this ecosystem. And it means that students for the first time are going to have real data to play with in terms of actually developing innovative solutions to problems. So we want to be at the forefront of this and driving it forward. The other element is it's gotten significant publicity in the international trade press, so that has helped us in a variety of ways as an airline in terms of just building profile. So I'm going to leave you with a few things in terms of lessons from this space. If you're going to be looking at external partners, one of the things you need to look at is how you engage in external deal flow. So Propeller, for example, is an example of the deal flow process, how you actually find those startups that you want to look at. Plug and Play was mentioned earlier as well in terms of those types of organizations. But finding the amount of deal flow and the amount of startups that you'll need to work with in a variety of different sectors, you need to decide how you're going to go about doing that. Establish how you can help startups and create pathways for that to happen. One of the biggest challenges is companies say that they want to work with startups, but they've no idea how to actually integrate them into that process. And that's a huge barrier for success. So you actually have to do the groundwork in that and say, here's how we're going to move things along, here's how we're going to have simplified legals, that kind of thing. And that's a big challenge in corporates. It's a huge challenge for us. Use it as a tool to engage employees. People want to be involved in innovation, so use it as that process for actually increasing engagement within an organization and seeing how innovation happens. Get out and evangelize. People won't come to you unless they know what your problems are. So you got to actually get out and talk about, here are the issues that we have and we want solutions around them, come to us with them. And then finally, engage the wider community and partner where you can. Innovation is a collaborative effort. Diversity and inclusiveness is key to that. The examples of more diverse environments coming up with more creative solutions are just riddled through business. So the more people you can engage with across that, the better. So that is my few thoughts for today. Thank you very much, everyone.